I thought burying my 6-year-old daughter was the worst pain imaginable. But I was wrong. The true agony came when I returned from the cemetery to find her bed thrown on the lawn like garbage to make room for my in-laws' new grandchild. They think I am weak, but they forgot that this room holds secrets that will destroy them. If you want to see the greedy beg for mercy, sit down, grab some tea, and listen close. My name is Mary Beth Milford, and on the 3rd anniversary of the worst day of my life, the sun was shining with a cruel and mocking brightness. It was a humid afternoon in July, the kind of heat that sticks your shirt to your back and makes the air shimmer above the asphalt. I was driving my old sedan back from the cemetery, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned the color of bone. On the passenger seat beside me lay a bouquet of white chrysanthemums that I had not left at the grave. The ground had been too hard, the maintenance crew too busy with their weed whackers, and in a moment of overwhelming possessiveness, I had decided that Sarah would not want these wilting flowers baking on the dry earth. I wanted to bring them home to her room. I turned the corner onto my street, seeking the sanctuary of the colonial-style house that had been my only refuge since the accident. But as my house came into view, the breath seized in my throat. My driveway, usually empty and quiet, was blocked. A massive, heavy-duty pickup truck was parked at an aggressive angle, blocking the entrance to my garage. The chrome bumper caught the sunlight, blinding me for a second. But when my vision cleared, I saw the logo decaled on the side door in bold. Navy blue letters, Sterling Construction. My stomach dropped as if I were on an elevator whose cables had just snapped. I slammed on the brakes, parking haphazardly by the curb, and stepped out into the oppressive heat. The sound hit me before the sight did. It was the screech of tearing wood and the guttural roar of a power drill. It sounded like the house was screaming. I ran toward the front lawn, and that was when my legs nearly gave out beneath me. The manicured green grass, which I had kept trimmed with obsessive care because Sarah used to love rolling down the gentle slope, was covered in debris. But it was not construction waste. It was a life, there, thrown haphazardly onto the grass like common garbage, was my daughter's entire world, the lavender wardrobe, the one Lucas and I had painted together a month before she was born, stood crookedly on the uneven ground. One of its doors was hanging open, exposing the empty darkness inside. Beside it were stacks of her books, the spines bending under their own weight. And then I saw the dolls. The porcelain dolls Sarah had collected since she was 2 years old were piled in a heap. I walked forward, my vision blurring, and fell to my knees beside the pile. Her favorite, a doll with curly blonde hair that looked so much like her, was lying face down in the dirt. I reached out with trembling hands and turned it over. The porcelain arm had snapped off at the elbow. The jagged white edge of the ceramic looked like a broken bone. "Hey, watch where you're walking. We have a schedule to keep." The booming voice snapped my head up. Standing on my front porch, looking like a king surveying a conquered village, was my father-in-law, Preston Sterling. He was wearing a navy suit that cost more than my car, completely inappropriate for the weather or a construction site. But Preston never dressed for comfort. He dressed for dominance. He was shouting instructions to 2 workers who were hauling a twin-sized mattress, Sarah's mattress, through the front door. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the broken doll to my chest. "What are you doing?" I screamed, my voice cracking. "Preston, what is this?" He did not look guilty. He did not look sad. He looked at his wrist, checking his gold watch with an expression of profound irritation. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief and frowned at me. "You are late, Mary Beth," he said, his voice projecting over the noise of the drills coming from inside the house. "I told the boys we would have the room cleared by noon, but you were not here to unlock the interior doors. We had to take the hinges off. It put us behind by 45 minutes. I stared at him, unable to comprehend the words coming out of his mouth. "You took the hinges off? You broke into my house?" "Our house, Mary Beth, family property," he corrected me, waving a hand dismissively. "And stop clutching that toy like a child. We need to clear the space. The architect is coming at 4 o'clock to finalize the expansion plans. I rushed toward the porch steps, adrenaline flooding my veins. Expansion plans? What are you talking about? That is Sarah's room. You cannot touch it. Preston stepped down one stair, blocking my path. He towered over me, a wall of expensive cologne and arrogance. Sarah is gone. Mary Beth. It has been 3 years. It is time to stop this morbid shrine keeping. That room is dark, depressing, and frankly, a waste of prime square footage. He gestured to the open door behind him, where dust was billowing out like smoke. We are knocking down the partition wall between the guest room and the nursery. It is going to be a master suite for the baby, a royal nursery for the first male heir of the Sterling line. My grandson deserves space, light, and a fresh start, not a mausoleum filled with dusty relics. Heir? I choked out. You are destroying my daughter's memory for a baby that is not even born yet? A living baby, Preston said coldly. Priorities. Mary Beth, the dead do not need square footage. The living do. I tried to push past him. I had to get inside. I had to stop them from tearing down the walls that held the last echoes of my daughter's laughter. But before I could reach the door, a hand clamped onto my shoulder. It was heavy and firm. I spun around to see Derek, my brother-in-law. He was younger than Lucas had been, but he had none of Lucas's warmth. He had Preston's shark-like eyes and a mouth that naturally rested in a sneer. He was wearing a polo shirt with the collar popped, looking like he had just come from a country club lunch while I was coming from a graveyard. Calm down, Mary Beth, Derek said, his voice dripping with condescension. You are making a scene in front of the neighbors. Let go of me, Derek, I struggled, but he held me back with humiliating ease. You should be thanking us, he hissed, leaning in close so only I could hear. Dad is putting $50,000 into this renovation. We are upgrading the asset. Do you have any idea how much this adds to the property value? You are sitting on a gold mine and treating it like a tomb. I don't care about the value. It is my home, I shouted, tears finally spilling over. It is my sanctuary. It is a house, Derek corrected, tightening his grip on my arm. And it is way too big for one lonely woman who spends her days dusting ghost stories. Then, the front door opened again, but I wasn't a worker this time. It was Tiffany. Derek's wife waddled out onto the porch, one hand resting protectively over her 6-month pregnant belly. She was dressed in a flowing white maternity dress that looked pristine against the backdrop of demolition dust. She looked glowing, healthy, and utterly indifferent to the devastation around her. On the other hand, she was holding a silver picture frame. My breath hitched. It was the photo of Sarah taken on her 5th birthday. She was wearing a tiara and blowing out candles, her eyes crinkled in pure joy. It was the last photo where she looked truly healthy before the sickness took hold. Tiffany held the frame up to the sunlight, tilting her head critically. Preston? She called out, her voice high and nasal. This frame is actually sterling silver. We might be able to polish it up and reuse it for the baby's baptism photos. What do you think? Tiffany, put that down, I screamed, lunging forward, but Derek yanked me back. Tiffany looked at me, then back at the photo. A slow, pitying smile spread across her face. Oh, Mary Beth, you are back. We were wondering when you would show up. She looked at the picture of my daughter one last time, then shrugged. Actually, never mind. It is a bit tacky, too old-fashioned. With a casual flick of her wrist, she tossed the frame. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the silver rectangle spin through the air. It didn't land on the grass. It landed with a sickening crunch into a large cardboard box near the bottom of the stairs. The side of the box had the word charity scrawled on it in black marker. Oops, Tiffany giggled, though her eyes were cold. Well, someone less fortunate can use it. We are going for a more modern aesthetic, minimalist, clean. You monsters, I whispered, the fight draining out of me not because I was surrendering, but because the shock was physically paralyzing. How can you do this? We are family, Mary Beth, Preston said. turning his back on me to shout at a worker who was carrying out Sarah's rocking chair. Families help each other move on. You have been stuck in the mud for too long. We are just giving you a push. He checked his watch again. Derek, keep her out of the way. The demolition crew is about to take down the load-bearing beam to install the steel support. I do not want any liability issues if she trips over a power cord. Derek released my arm with a shove, dusting off his hands as if he had touched something filthy. Go for a walk. Mary Beth, go get a coffee. Come back when you have cooled down and can appreciate what we are doing for you. I stood there, trembling, clutching the broken doll. I turned to the front door, the entrance to the home that my great-aunt had left me, the home where I had been a wife and a mother. I reached into my purse and pulled out my keys. I needed to get inside. I needed to save the rocking chair. I needed to save something. I rushed to the side door, the one that led into the kitchen, hoping to bypass the chaos in the front. I jammed my key into the lock and twisted. It didn't turn. I tried again, jiggling it, forcing it until the metal bit into my palm. It wouldn't budge. I pulled the key out and looked at it, then looked at the lock. The brass was shiny, new. My blood ran cold. I ran back to the front, where Derek was now standing with his arm around Tiffany, whispering something that made her laugh. My key, I said, my voice hollow. It doesn't work. Derek didn't even look at me. He just smirked, staring out at the street. Oh, right. Dad had the locksmith out here at 8 this morning. Security upgrade. We can't have just anyone walking in and out when there are valuable construction materials on site. And once the baby is here, well, safety first. You changed the locks on my house? We secured the perimeter, Preston corrected from the porch, not looking up from a blueprint he had unrolled. You will get a new key when the project is done. For now, you can stay in the guest quarters, or a hotel. I am sure Derek can recommend a place. I stood there, the sun beating down on me, the smell of sawdust and exhaust fumes filling my lungs. The white chrysanthemums in my car were wilting in the heat. My daughter's belongings were scattered on the lawn like trash after a storm. And the people standing on my porch, the people who claimed to be my family, looked at me not with love, not even with pity, but with the annoyance one feels toward a stray dog that won't go away. I realized then, standing trite and alone on the pavement, that this wasn't a renovation, it wasn't a family intervention, it was a hostile takeover. They hadn't just come to change a room, they had come to erase me. They were colonizers planting a flag on my memories, convinced that their power and their money made them untouchable. I looked at the broken doll in my hand. I looked at the charity box where Sarah's face lay buried under discarded knickknacks. The exhaustion that had been weighing me down a moment ago began to shift. It hardened. It crystallized into something cold and sharp in the pit of my stomach. They thought I was just a grieving widow. They thought I was weak. They thought they could lock me out of my own life. I turned away from the house, not wanting them to see the look that was forming in my eyes. It was no longer the look of a victim. It was the look of someone who had just realized that the rules of engagement had changed. This was no longer a home. It was a battlefield. I am 32 years old, and by trade, I am a restoration artist. My work requires a steady hand, an abundance of patience, and the ability to see beneath layers of grime and neglect, to find the original beauty hidden underneath. I spend my days with a magnifying glass and a scalpel, removing varnish that has yellowed over centuries, fixing tears in canvas that others would deem irreparable. I know how to wait. I know how to be quiet. And most importantly, I know that just because something looks broken on the surface does not mean it cannot be weaponized if you know where the structural weaknesses lie. Preston and the rest of the Sterling clan looked at me and saw a mouse. They saw a woman who spoke softly, who dressed modestly, and who had spent the last 24 months existing in a fog of depression. They mistook my silence for submission. They assumed that because I did not scream at dinner parties or fight them for scraps of attention, I was content to let them walk over me, but they made a critical error in their assessment of my character, and an even bigger error regarding the legal standing of the ground they were currently desecrating. This house, the one they were drilling into with such entitlement, was never Lucas's property. It was never a sterling asset. It was mine. I inherited this colonial estate in 2015 from my great-aunt Clara, a woman who despised the nouveau riche affectations that the Sterlings hold so dear. She left it to me 3 years before I even walked down the aisle with Lucas. It was my name on the deed, my name on the property tax records, and my name that secured the insurance. When I married Lucas, I did not merge our assets. I kept the house separate, not out of distrust, but because Aunt Clara had made me swear on her deathbed that I would always have a roof that no man could take away from me. It was the only time I ever saw the future more clearly than the present. Lucas, my late husband, was the anomaly of the Sterling bloodline. He was soft where they were hard, artistic where they were commercial, and kind where they were cruel. He did not want to build skyscrapers or hostile takeovers. He wanted to design parks and libraries. But you do not say no to Preston Sterling without consequences. Lucas spent his whole life trying to earn a pat on the head from a father who only knew how to use a whip. 2 years ago, that desperate need for validation got him killed. I closed my eyes for a moment, leaning against the rough bark of the oak tree in the side yard, trying to block out the sound of the saws. The official report said it was an accident. A scaffolding collapse at the Sterling Heights project during a routine inspection. Lucas was not even supposed to be on that level, but Preston had sent him up there to check a welding issue. I remember the closed casket. I remember Preston giving a eulogy that sounded more like a press release for the company's safety protocols than a farewell to his son. And I remember the silence that followed. Sarah had died a year before Lucas, taken by a sudden, aggressive illness that baffled the doctors and hollowed out my soul. That room upstairs, the one with the lavender walls, was where we had spent our Sunday afternoons. Sarah had inherited my love for color and Lucas's imagination. We would sit on the floor, the sunlight streaming in through the bay window, and paint watercolor landscapes of places we promised to visit one day. Lucas would sit in the corner, sketching us, smiling that sad, gentle smile of his. When they were both gone, I became a ghost in my own home. I stopped working. I stopped seeing friends. I existed in the spaces they had left behind. The Sterlings did not offer grief counseling. They did not bring casseroles or check on my mental health. Instead, about 3 months after Lucas's funeral, the offers started coming. At first, they were subtle. Preston would mention how burdensome a large property must be for a single woman. Then Derek would bring up the rising property taxes. Finally, they stopped pretending. This house sits on 2 acres of waterfront land in what the real estate brochures call the Golden Horseshoe, a fictional equivalent to the Hamptons where new money goes to wash itself clean. The land alone was worth millions. To them, my home was just an underutilized asset on a spreadsheet. They thought my refusal to sell was sentimental foolishness. They did not know about the debt. 6 months before he died, Lucas had come to me, pale and shaking. He had made a bad investment, a side deal he thought would finally prove his business acumen to Preston. It had failed spectacularly. To cover his tracks, he had borrowed a significant sum of money, $200,000, from a shell company controlled by his father. He was terrified Preston would find out he couldn't pay it back. "Don't let them swallow you like they did me, Mary Beth," he had whispered to me one night, his head in my lap, tears soaking my jeans. "If anything happens to me, promise me you won't let them own you." I had promised, and I had acted. I used the entirety of my savings, the money I had earned from restoring a collection of Renaissance portraits for a museum in New York, and I paid off Lucas's debt. I did it quietly. I wired the money to the shell company's account with a reference number that only the accountant would recognize. Preston likely saw the ledger balance out and assumed Lucas had fixed his own mess. He never knew that his daughter-in-law, the laborer, as his wife Victoria liked to call me, had bailed out his son. That payment cleared the last financial tether the Sterlings had to me or this house. I owed them nothing. In fact, if moral bankruptcy had a monetary value, They owed me everything. I pushed off the tree and moved toward the back of the house. The front door was impassable, guarded by Derek and his smug sense of superiority, but they had forgotten that I knew this house's bones better than anyone. Behind a dense trellis of climbing hydrangeas near the patio, there was a loose stone in the foundation. It was an old hide-a-key spot my aunt had used, and one I had maintained for emergencies. My fingers scrabbled in the dirt until I felt the cold metal of the small magnetic box. I pulled it out, my heart hammering against my ribs. Inside was the spare key, tarnished but functional. I slipped to the back door, the service entrance that led into the mudroom. I inserted the key and held my breath. If they had been thorough, if they had changed every lock, the key turned. The bolt slid back with a heavy thud. I slipped inside and closed the door softly behind me. The air inside the house was thick with white dust. It tasted like chalk and dry wall. The noise was deafening in here. The high-pitched whine of an electric saw cutting through timber vibrated through the floorboards and up into the soles of my shoes. I moved through the kitchen, which was mercifully untouched, though I noticed a half-eaten sandwich and a greasy wrapper from a fast food chain sitting on my pristine marble counter. Disrespect. It was in their DNA. I crept down the hallway, staying close to the walls. I could hear Preston's booming voice coming from the second floor, instructing the workers on where to place the new electrical outlets. I could hear Tiffany laughing, a sharp, grating sound that made my teeth ache. "Make sure the chandelier is centered," she was saying. "I want the crystal to catch the morning light. It needs to look majestic." Majestic. In the room where my daughter took her last breath, I bypassed the stairs. I could not go up there yet. If I saw them tearing down the wall with my own eyes, I would lose the cold, hard clarity that was currently keeping me upright. I would scream, and then I would be removed, and I would lose my chance. Instead, I turned left, down the short corridor that led to the library. This was Lucas's sanctuary. Since the day the police came to tell me he was dead, I had kept this door locked. I had not dusted. I had not moved a single paper. It was a time capsule of the man he was, not the man his father tried to mold him into. The door was locked, but the key on my ring, the one on the chain I wore around my neck, separate from the house keys, opened it. I stepped inside, and the silence was sudden and heavy. The thick oak door and the soundproofing Lucas had installed to block out his family's constant demands did their job. The room smelled of old paper, tobacco, and the cedar wood of his desk. It was dark, the curtains drawn tight against the sun. I fumbled for the desk lamp, clicking it on. A pool of yellow light flooded the leather blotter. There was his sketchbook, open to a drawing of a bridge he would never build. There was his coffee mug, a dark ring of dried liquid at the bottom, left there for 2 years. I walked around the desk and sat in his chair. It creaked, a familiar sound that brought a fresh wave of grief so potent I almost doubled over, but I forced it down. I forced it into the box in my mind where I kept the anger. "Open it only at the dead end, Mary Beth." That was what he had said. 2 weeks before the accident, we had been arguing about his stress levels, about how thin he looked. He had taken my hand, led me into this room, and pointed to the wall safe hidden behind the framed map of Paris. "If I am gone," he had said, his eyes feverishly bright. "And if they come for you, if you feel like you have nowhere left to turn, open the safe, but not before. Promise me." I had thought he was being dramatic. I had thought it was the stress talking. But sitting here now, with the sound of his father destroying our daughter's room vibrating in the ceiling above me, I realized he had known. He had known exactly what they were capable of. I was at the dead end. There was nowhere left to go but forward, into the war. I stood up and moved the map of Paris. The safe was a small digital model, fireproof and heavy. I stared at the keypad. I knew the code. It was the date of the first time we met, followed by Sarah's time of birth. 8140325. My fingers hovered over the buttons. I was shaking. What if it was empty? What if it was just more debt, more sorrow? What if the dead end was simply a final goodbye? But then I heard a crash from upstairs, followed by the sound of shattering glass, perhaps a mirror or a window, and then Preston's voice, shouting, "Just sweep it into the corner. We are laying hardwood over it anyway." The hesitation evaporated. I pressed the buttons. Beep, 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 beep. The mechanism whirred. A mechanical groan of surrender. The heavy steel door popped open a fraction of an inch. I took a deep breath, hooked my finger around the edge, and pulled. Inside, there was no money. There were no stacks of cash or gold bars. The safe was dark and cool. Lying on the metal shelf were 3 thick, leather-bound notebooks, their edges worn from use, and sitting on top of them was a thick, white medical envelope, stamped with the logo of a private clinic in Switzerland. I reached in and pulled them out. The notebooks were heavy. I opened the top one. It was Lucas's handwriting, scrawled and hurried. Project Sterling Heights, Phase 1, Substandard Concrete Usage Authorized by POS, Ignoring Safety Protocol 7B. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I opened the second notebook. Bribes to City Councilman Miller. Zoning reclassification for the Wetland District. Cash payments undocumented. I looked at the medical envelope. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it. It was addressed to both Lucas and Derek Sterling. The date was from 4 years ago. Confidential genetic screening. I did not open the envelope yet. The header alone sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I knew, with a sudden, terrifying instinct, that what was in this envelope was the reason Lucas had been so relieved when we had Sarah, and why he had looked at Derek with such pity during family gatherings. I looked up at the ceiling, toward the noise of the destruction. They were tearing my house apart to build a nursery for a miracle baby, a male heir. I looked back down at the medical file in my hand. You wanted a legacy. Preston, I thought, my thumb tracing the seal of the envelope. You wanted to secure the future of the Sterling name? I opened the envelope. As my eyes scanned the clinical black and white text of the results, the tears in my eyes dried up completely. A cold, grim smile touched my lips for the first time in 2 years. They had taken my daughter's room. They had taken my husband. They had tried to take my dignity. But Lucas had left me the one thing they could not buy, bribe, or bully their way out of. He had left me the truth. I placed the documents back in the safe, but I did not close it. I took my phone out of my pocket and snapped a picture of the open notebook pages. Then the medical report. Then I closed the safe, replaced the map of Paris, and sat back in the chair. I was no longer just a grieving widow. I was the keeper of the secrets, and it was time to introduce the Sterlings to the consequences of their own sins. The sun had set, but the invasion of my home was far from over. It had simply transitioned from the brute force of sledgehammers to the subtle, suffocating violence of fine china and forced conversation. Preston Sterling did not believe in takeout. When he decided that the family would dine at the new property, as he was now calling my home, he summoned his personal chef. So, instead of the quiet evening sandwich I might have made for myself over the sink, I found myself seated at the head of my own dining table, watching a stranger in chef's whites plate a roasted duck with a cherry reduction sauce that looked alarmingly like congealed blood. It was a theater of the absurd. My dining room, which Lucas and I had painted a warm, inviting sage green, now felt like a corporate boardroom. Preston sat at the opposite end, claiming the seat of authority as if by divine right. He was wearing a fresh suit, a charcoal gray 3-piece number that cost more than my first car. He did not loosen his tie. He did not take off his jacket. To Preston, relaxation was a sign of weakness, and dinner was not a meal. It was a venue for lectures on his favorite subject, himself. "The Sterling legacy," Preston announced, slicing into his duck with surgical precision, "is not just about money, it is about continuity. It is about ensuring that the bloodline holds the ground we have conquered." He pointed his fork at me, a glob of sauce threatening to drip onto the mahogany. "You understand that, don't you?" Mary Beth? Land is the only thing that lasts. People die, markets crash, but the earth remains. I took a slow sip of water. The irony of him lecturing me on the permanence of the earth while standing on the grave of my happiness was not lost on me. I understand the concept of ownership. Preston, I said quietly. Do you? Victoria Sterling chimed in. My mother-in-law was seated to my right, a vision of aging desperation draped in pastel chiffon. She was a woman who had never worked a day in her life, yet she looked perpetually exhausted by the effort of maintaining her appearance. Her fingers were weighted down by 3 different diamond rings, the stones large enough to be vulgar, clinking against the crystal wine glass every time she lifted it. She looked at my hands, which were resting on the tablecloth. I had spent the morning working with harsh solvents to remove a layer of soot from a 19th century oil painting, and my cuticles were dry, my nails short and functional. I worry about you, Mary Beth. Victoria sighed, a sound that was meant to convey sympathy but delivered only judgment. All that scrubbing, that manual labor, it ruins the skin. I was telling my dermatologist just yesterday that I do not know how you do it. Breathing in those fumes, touching all that old, dirty canvas, it is so gritty. It is art restoration. Victoria, I said, my voice steady. I preserve history. It is cleaning, she corrected with a dismissive wave of her napkin. Let us call a spade a spade. You are a glorified cleaner. But I suppose it keeps you busy, idle hands and all that. Across from her sat Derek and Tiffany. If Preston and Victoria were the architects of this misery, Derek and Tiffany were the enthusiastic tenants. Derek, at 30 years old, was a man who had never been told no. He had a title at Sterling Construction, Director of Strategic Development, but everyone knew his actual job description was Preston's shadow. He was currently ignoring the meal entirely, scrolling through his phone with a bored expression, occasionally chuckling at something on the screen. He looked like a softer, weaker version of his father, the kind of man who would drown if you threw him into the deep end of the real world without a trust fund as a life preserver. And then there was Tiffany. She was glowing, radiant with the confidence of a woman who believes she has just won the genetic lottery. She was a former Instagram influencer who had pivoted her brand from bikini travel to wealthy traditional wife the moment the ring slid onto her finger. She rubbed her stomach constantly, a performative gesture designed to remind everyone in the room that she was the vessel of the future. The duck is a little dry, Tiffany complained, pushing the meat around her plate. I have to be careful, for the little prince. He only likes the best. Eat your vegetables, Tiff, Derek mumbled without looking up from his phone. Dad paid $400 for this meal. It is not about the price. Derek, Preston snapped, slamming his hand down on the table hard enough to make the silverware jump. It is about the standard. We are Sterlings. We do not settle for dry duck, and we do not settle for mediocrity. He turned his cold, gray eyes back to me. Which brings me to the business at hand. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The preamble was over. Preston reached under the table and pulled out a leather portfolio. He unzipped it with a slow, deliberate sound that reminded me of a body bag being opened. He slid a thick stack of documents across the polished wood until they rested just inches from my untouched plate. I have been speaking with the family attorneys, Preston said, his tone shifting from conversational to dictatorial. Given the new circumstances, we need to restructure the assets, specifically, this house. I looked at the papers. The title page read, Property Transfer and Life Estate Agreement. As you know, Preston continued, pouring himself another glass of a vintage Bordeaux he had undoubtedly raided from Lucas's collection. You have no heir. Sarah is gone. And with Lucas passed, the direct line ends with you. Legally, that is a dead end. But with Derek's son arriving in 3 months, the Sterling line continues. It is only logical that the family seat, this estate, passes to the future head of the family. You want me to sign my house over to an unborn baby? I asked. keeping my face perfectly blank. Technically, to a trust in his name, Preston corrected, but effectively, yes. However, we are not heartless. Mary Beth, we are family. I have had the lawyers draw up a very generous support contract for you. He gestured for Derek to explain. Derek finally put down his phone, looking annoyed at being asked to participate in the actual theft. Basically, Derek said, picking at a loose thread on his polo shirt, we are going to convert the basement into a fully independent living suite. It is 1,200 square feet. Dad is putting in a kitchenette, a bathroom, everything. You move down there. Tiffany and I take the upper floors. We need the space for the nursery and the au pair. Plus, you won't have to worry about the upkeep of the main house. We handle the bills, the taxes, the landscaping. You just exist, rent-free. Rent-free, I repeated, in the basement of my own home. It is a garden-level suite, Tiffany interjected, her voice sickly sweet. It has those nice little windows near the ceiling, and honestly, Mary Beth, it is for the best. This house is way too much for you. You are rattling around in here like a ghost. It is depressing. We are bringing life back into the place. Life, I echoed. Yes, life. Tiffany beamed, leaning forward. Think about it. You get to be the well, like the live-in aunt. You can help out if we need a sitter. But mostly you will have your own privacy, and we won't charge you a dime. It is basically charity. I looked around the table. They were serious. They sat there, eating the food cooked in my kitchen, drinking the wine bought by my husband, plotting to shove me underground like a shameful secret they wanted to hide but were too cheap to evict completely. They saw me as a parasite attached to their empire, unaware that they were the ones feeding on the carcass of my life. And what if I say no? I asked softly. Preston laughed. It was a dry barking sound. You won't say no, Mary Beth, because if you do, I will tie you up in litigation for the next 10 years. I will question the validity of your aunt's will. I will claim that Lucas made improvements to the property using sterling capital, giving us an equity stake. I will drain your bank account with legal fees until you are begging to live in a cardboard box under the bridge. This offer? This is me being nice. Besides, Victoria added, picking a piece of bread with her manicured talons, it is time to move on, dear. Holding on to this place is unhealthy. It is morbid. Morbid, I said, my gaze drifting to the empty chair where Sarah used to sit. You threw her bed on the lawn. We cleared the clutter, Tiffany said, waving her fork dismissively. And honestly, Mary Beth, do not look at me like that. Someone had to do it. You were turning this place into a shrine. It was creepy. She took a sip of wine. Despite being pregnant, she claimed one glass was medicinal, and then she said the thing that made the world stop spinning. If you really think about it, Tiffany said, tilting her head, Sarah leaving us was almost a mercy. She was always sickly, wasn't she? And Lucas was so distracted by her. Now that they are both gone, the slate is clean. We can start over. A strong, healthy boy to carry the name. No baggage. It is like the universe hit the reset button for us. You should be relieved. The burden is gone. The sound of the room vanished. The clinking of cutlery. The hum of the refrigerator. The distant traffic. It all fell away. All I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears. Loud as a river. A mercy. A reset button. A burden. My hand tightened around the silver dinner utensil. I gripped it so hard that the edges pressed into my palm. I could feel the cold metal against my skin, solid and real, in that split second. I saw it. I saw myself leaning forward across the table. I saw the look of panic on Tiffany's perfectly made-up face. I saw the harm I could cause with just one moment of surrendered control. But then, I remembered the safe. I remembered the 3 leather notebooks. I remembered the medical file from Switzerland. Force would only make me the villain. It would give Preston exactly what he wanted. Proof that I was unstable, unfit, and easily cast aside. Force was the tool of the desperate. I was not desperate. I was informed. I slowly, deliberately, loosened my grip on the utensil. I placed it gently on the edge of my plate. I picked up my napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth, though I had not eaten a single bite. I looked at Tiffany. I looked at her stomach, round and proud under the designer silk. I looked at Derek, the man who had supposedly fathered this miracle heir. I looked at Preston, the architect of this grand delusion. "You make a compelling case," I said, my voice calm, almost melodic. The sudden lack of resistance seemed to confuse them. Preston blinked. Victoria paused with her glass halfway to her mouth. "I am glad you are finally seeing reason," Preston grunted, though he looked suspicious. "I just have one question," I said, locking eyes with Tiffany. I let my gaze drop to her belly, then back to her face, searching for a flicker of shame, but finding only arrogance. Before I consider giving up my home for this legacy, for this future king of the Sterling Empire, I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. "Are you absolutely certain it is a boy?" For a second, the air left the room. Derek stopped chewing. Tiffany's smile faltered, her eyes darting to the side for a fraction of a second before she recovered. Then, the laughter started. It began with Tiffany, a high, incredulous giggle, then Derek joined in, a low chuckle. Finally, Preston let out a loud guffaw, shaking his head as if I had just told a joke at a funeral. "Oh, Mary Beth," Tiffany laughed, wiping a tear from her eye. "You really are simple, aren't you? We have had the ultrasounds. We have seen the anatomy. It is a boy, a 100%, undeniable Sterling male." "Of course it is," Preston sneered, pouring more wine. "Sterlings only produce winners. We don't make mistakes." I watched them laugh. I watched them toast to their certainty, to their biology, to their victory. I sat in the silence of my own making, clutching the secret that would eventually turn their laughter into ash. "Right," I said softly, picking up my water glass. "Winners." I took a sip, letting the cool liquid wash away the taste of bile in my throat. They had no idea that the game had already been played, and they had lost before they even rolled the dice. I wasn't just sitting at the dinner table with them. I was sitting in the front row of their execution, and they were the ones tightening the noose. The dinner party eventually dispersed, leaving behind the stale scent of cigar smoke and the lingering echo of their collective arrogance. I waited until I heard the heavy thud of the front door closing behind Preston and Victoria, and the lighter, rhythmic clicking of Tiffany's heels retreating up the stairs to the guest quarters they had commandeered. Only when the house was silent did I return to the study. I locked the door, not just with the key, but with a heavy chair wedged under the handle. Paranoia was no longer a symptom of stress. It was a necessary survival tactic. I went back to the safe. I had glanced at the contents earlier, but the shock of the invasion had kept me from absorbing the fine print. Now, fueled by the cold rage of the dinner conversation, I needed to dissect the information with the precision I used in my restoration work. I sat at Lucas's desk, adjusted the lamp, and spread the documents out on the blotter like a coroner examining evidence. First, the construction diaries. Lucas had been meticulous. He had logged every shipment of concrete, every steel beam, and every safety inspection for the Sterling Heights project. As I turned the pages, a pattern of distress emerged. There were notes in the margins, written in red ink: Batch 402 failed stress test. Dad ordered it poured anyway. Another entry, dated 3 weeks before his death, read: Safety railings on level 12 are unsecured. Budget cuts. I told him someone is going to fall. My heart clenched. It was not just an accident. It was negligent homicide born of greed. But while this confirmed Preston's moral bankruptcy, it was the second document, the medical file from Switzerland. That held the key to the current charade. I pulled the report out of the envelope. It was a comprehensive genetic and fertility screening dated October of 2018. Lucas had forced Derek to go with him, likely under the guise of a brotherly checkup. But in reality, Lucas must have suspected something. I ran my finger down the column listed under Derek Sterling, The medical terminology was dry and clinical, but the conclusion was devastatingly simple. At the age of 15, Derek had contracted a severe case of mumps which had led to bilateral orchitis, a severe inflammation, the report stated, in unambiguous bold text, that his sperm count was effectively 0, the motility was non-existent. The probability of natural conception was listed as less than 1 in 10 million. I sat back, the leather chair groaning softly. Less than 1 in 10 million. And yet, upstairs, Tiffany was sleeping with a 6-month-old fetus in her womb, and Derek was strutting around like a rooster who had just announced the dawn. I closed my eyes and replayed the moment Tiffany had announced her pregnancy 3 months ago. We had been at a family brunch. When she showed the ultrasound picture, Derek had not looked surprised. He had not looked overcome with the miraculous joy of a man beating impossible odds. He had looked relieved. He had looked like a man who had successfully closed a business deal. There was a smirk of triumph in his eyes, but it was directed at his father, not his wife. Derek knew he was sterile. He had to know, which meant he knew the baby was not his. The picture began to form, sharp and ugly. Derek needed the inheritance. Preston had made it clear that the bulk of the estate would go to the son who provided an heir. Derek was playing a dangerous game of cuckoo, accepting another man's child to secure his financial future. But who was the father? I thought about Tiffany's schedule for the past year. She had been taking frequent wellness trips to a high-end spa called the Opal Sanctuary. It was located in a coastal city about 2 hours south of here. I knew the area well because Preston often bragged about the exclusive underground poker games held at the Diamondback Casino, which was conveniently located right next door to the spa. If Tiffany was meeting someone, it wasn't a random affair. In the Sterling world, everything was transactional. I reached for the phone book, an old habit, and then switched to my laptop. I needed a professional. I did not want a divorce lawyer's PI who chased cheating spouses for alimony. I needed someone who understood fraud. I found a name I remembered Lucas mentioning once, Arthur Reynolds. He was an independent investigator who specialized in insurance scams and corporate espionage. I called the number. It was late, almost 11 at night, but he answered on the second ring. His voice was gravelly, like he had been smoking for 40 years. Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, my name is Mary Beth Milford. I have a job that requires discretion and a lack of squeamishness regarding wealthy families. I charge $500 a day, plus expenses, he said, skipping the pleasantries. Double if I have to wear a tuxedo. I do not need you to wear a tuxedo, I said, keeping my voice low. I need you to track the movements of a woman named Tiffany Sterling over the last 8 months. Specifically, her visits to the Opal Sanctuary and the Diamondback Casino. I need to know who she meets, how long they stay, and if there are any financial exchanges. I suspect a fraud is being perpetrated involving a substantial inheritance. I can start tomorrow morning, Reynolds said. Wire the retainer, I agreed, and hung up. Step 1 was in motion. The next morning, the house was once again a war zone. The construction crew arrived at 7 o'clock, their drills acting as a jarring alarm clock. I dressed in jeans and a heavy work shirt, determined to monitor their every move. I could not stop them from destroying the walls, but I could make sure they did not steal anything else. Around 10 o'clock. A sudden shout echoed from the upstairs hallway. Hey, boss, you gotta see this. I was in the kitchen, but I dropped my coffee mug and ran. I raced up the stairs, my boots thudding on the hardwood. I reached the landing just as Preston came striding out of the guest room, looking annoyed at the interruption. We both entered Sarah's room at the same time. The air was thick with white plaster dust. A large section of the drywall between the closet and the window had been smashed open with sledgehammers. One of the workers, a burly man with a red bandana, was pointing a flashlight into the dark cavity between the studs. We hit something metal, the worker said. Thought it was a pipe at first, but it is loose. He reached in with a gloved hand and pulled out a box. It was not a modern safe. It was an old, rusted tin box. the kind people used to store biscuits in the 1950s. It was taped shut with layers of yellowing masking tape. Preston's eyes lit up. Greed was a reflex for him. "Give that here," he commanded, stepping forward and extending his hand. "It is part of the house. It belongs to me." My mind raced. I did not know what was in that box. It could be nothing. It could be old toys. But if it was hidden in the wall of my aunt's house, it was private, and I would be damned if I let Preston Sterling put his manicured hands on one more piece of my history. I lunged forward, not at Preston, but at the worker. I grabbed the box from his dusty gloves before Preston could react. "It is mine!" I shouted, clutching the cold, rusty metal to my chest. "Hand it over. Mary Beth," Preston barked, his face reddening. "That wall is my property. Anything inside it is mine. It could be coins. It could be bonds. It is not money," I lied, my brain scrambling for an excuse that would make a man like Preston back off. He was terrified of illness, of death, of anything unclean. "It is biological," I stammered, widening my eyes to look unhinged. "My Aunt Clara had a cat, Mr. Whiskers. When he died, she didn't want to bury him in the cold ground. She wanted him close. She told me she put him in the walls." I shook the box. Something inside rattled with a dry, clattering sound. "It is bones. Preston," I hissed, taking a step toward him. "Do you want to see the cat skeletons? Do you want to open it and breathe in the decay?" Preston recoiled, covering his nose and mouth with his hand. The worker looked green and took a step back. "Good God. You people are sick," Preston gagged. "Get that filth out of here. Throw it in the trash." "I will handle it," I said, clutching the box tighter. "I will take it to the incinerator." "Just get it out of the nursery," he shouted, "and sanitize that wall cavity." I turned and fled the room, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would bruise my ribs. I ran down the stairs, out the back door, and into the detached garage where I kept my restoration chemicals. I locked the door and slid down against it, gasping for air. My hands were shaking as I set the tin box on my workbench. I grabbed a utility knife and sliced through the layers of ancient tape. The lid was stuck, rusted shut. I had to pry it open with a flathead screwdriver. With a screech of protesting metal, the lid popped off. It wasn't cat bones. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from moisture, were bundles of papers and a small, black USB drive. I unfolded the papers. They were old, dating back 10 years. They were photocopies of land deeds and zoning applications. I began to read, and as I did, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. These were not just random papers. This was a dossier. It seemed Lucas had found this long ago and hidden it. Or perhaps my aunt had collected it before she died. The documents detailed a systemic bribery scheme involving the rezoning of the entire waterfront district where my house sat. Preston had been paying off city officials to declare the surrounding wetlands as commercial zones, but the centerpiece was a map of my property. There were notes scribbled in Preston's handwriting on the margins of the map. Obstacle: owner refuses to sell. Strategy: wait for demise or financial ruin. And then, a letter addressed to the zoning commissioner, signed by Preston. It was dated 5 years ago. The Milford property is the linchpin. Once we acquire it, we can drain the marsh and build the resort. I don't care what it takes. If the old woman won't sell, we will pressure the air. Lucas can handle the girl. I stared at the paper. Lucas can handle the girl. Preston had not just wanted the house after Lucas died. He had been planning to steal it since before I was even married. He had viewed my marriage to his son not as a union, but as an acquisition strategy. He thought Lucas was his operative. He didn't know that Lucas had fallen in love with me and refused to play the game. I looked at the USB drive. If the papers were the smoke, this drive was likely the fire. I plugged it into my laptop, which I kept on the workbench for logging chemical mixtures. It contained audio files, hundreds of hours of recorded meetings. Lucas must have been wearing a wire or recording his father for years, gathering insurance. I sat there in the dusty garage, surrounded by the smell of turpentine and rust. They thought they were building a nursery. They thought they were securing a legacy. They didn't know that while they were tearing down my walls. They had handed me the demolition charges to bring down their entire empire, the spa trips, the sterile husband, the bribery, the land grab. I wasn't just a victim of a bad family dynamic. I was the target of a decade-long conspiracy. And now, I was the one holding the gun. The email from Reynolds, the private investigator, arrived on my encrypted laptop at exactly 2 a.m. I was sitting in the garage, the only place in the house where I felt safe from the prying eyes of the Sterlings. The subject line was blank, just as I had requested. I opened the attachment, and a series of high-resolution, grainy photographs filled the screen. They were taken with a telephoto lens, capturing the intimate, shadowy corners of the Diamondback Casino's VIP lounge. There was Tiffany, looking resplendent in a red dress that hugged her pregnancy bump, a martini glass in her hand. But she was not alone. She was leaning close to a man, her hand resting familiarly on his knee, her head thrown back in laughter. The man was not Derek. He was older, perhaps in his early 60s, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. I recognized him immediately. It was Charles Vance. My blood ran cold, and then hot with the thrill of understanding. Charles Vance was the owner of Vance Aggregates, the largest construction material supplier in the state. He was also Preston Sterling's sworn enemy. For years, Preston had complained that Vance was price gouging him on concrete and steel. Trying to squeeze Sterling Construction out of the market, they were rivals in business, enemies in court, and competitors for the same country club status. I clicked to the next photo. It showed Vance's hand resting protectively on Tiffany's stomach. The look on his face was not lust. It was pride, possessiveness. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was not a simple affair. This was corporate warfare. Tiffany was not just cheating on Derek. She was the Trojan horse. She was carrying the heir of Preston's greatest enemy right into the heart of the Sterling Empire. Once that baby was born and named a Sterling, Vance would have a biological claim to the legacy Preston was so desperate to protect. It was a takeover. Not by stocks or bonds, but by blood. And Derek? I leaned back in the creaky garage chair, staring at the ceiling. Derek had to know. The medical report I had found in the safe proved he was sterile. Yet, he was parading this pregnancy around like a badge of honor. The logic fell into place. Sharp and jagged, Derek was weak, lazy, and greedy. He knew he could not produce an heir, and he knew that without an heir, Preston would never release the full trust fund or hand over the keys to the company. So, Derek had made a deal with the devil. He was willing to raise another man's child, his father's enemy's child, just to get his hands on the money. He was playing the cuckoo bird, nurturing a parasite in his own nest because he was too incompetent to build a nest of his own. It was disgusting, it was pathetic, and it was perfect for what I needed to do. I turned my attention back to the rusty tin box I had rescued from the wall. The USB drive I had found inside was still plugged into my computer. I had listened to the first few files, mostly boring meetings about zoning, but there was one file, dated 2 days before Lucas died, simply labeled The Argument. I put on my headphones and pressed play. The audio was clear. It had been recorded in this very house, likely in the library. "You cannot cut the budget on the scaffolding clamps. Dad," Lucas's voice rang out, sounding so alive, so urgent that tears pricked my eyes. "They are not rated for that wind load. If a storm hits, the whole platform comes down. We are over budget by $2 million already," Preston's voice boomed in response. "I am not paying premium prices for safety gear that we will use once. Use the standard clamps. Sign off on it. Lucas?" "I won't," Lucas said. His voice was shaking but firm. "It is dangerous. Someone could die." "If you do not sign off on it," Preston snarled, the sound of a fist hitting a desk echoing through the recording, "then you are out. I will cut you off. No trust fund, no job. You and that wife of yours can go live in a trailer. Do as you are told. Boy, the clamps are fine. Accidents happen. That is what insurance is for. The recording ended with the sound of a door slamming. I took the headphones off, my hands trembling. It was not an accident. Preston had known. He had willfully chosen cheap materials over human life. When Lucas died on that scaffolding, it wasn't bad luck. It was his father's greed that killed him. Preston Sterling was not just a thief and a bully. He was a killer, and he had buried the truth along with his son. I wiped the tears from my face. There would be time to mourn later. Right now, I needed to be a surgeon. I needed to cut the cancer out of my life. I spent the next 3 hours copying every single file. I made 3 backups. One went onto a cloud server with a password so complex it would take a supercomputer to crack it. One went onto a fresh encrypted hard drive that I hid inside a hollowed-out can of paint solvent on my shelf. The third copy, along with printed transcripts and the photos Reynolds had sent, I put into a FedEx envelope. I drove to a 24-hour shipping center 3 towns over. I addressed the package to Mr. Henderson, an attorney in Chicago, who had been my great-aunt's executor. He was a man who hated the Sterlings almost as much as I did. I included a note. If you do not hear from me by midnight on Friday, release this to the district attorney and the press, with the safety net in place. I returned to the house. It was dawn. The sky was bleeding from black to bruised purple. It was time to start the performance of a lifetime. I waited until 9 o'clock, when I knew Preston would be holding court in the dining room, drinking his third coffee. I dressed in a simple, modest gray dress, pulled my hair back into a severe bun, and walked in with my head bowed. Preston, Victoria, Derek, and Tiffany were all there. They stopped talking when I entered. I have made a decision, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I kept my eyes on the floor, projecting an image of total defeat. Preston put down his newspaper. And? I cannot fight you, I said. You have the lawyers. You have the money, and you are right. Sarah is gone. I am all alone. Maybe it is time for the house to be full of life again. I heard Tiffany let out a small, victorious squeal. I will sign the papers, I continued, looking up at Preston with dead, hollow eyes. I will transfer the deed to the trust for the baby, and I will move into the basement suite. Preston leaned back, a smug, oily smile spreading across his face. Smart girl. I knew you would come to your senses eventually. It is for the best, Mary Beth. We are family, after all. But, I said, raising a finger, I have one condition. Preston's eyes narrowed. I am not negotiating the stipend, Mary Beth. It is not about money, I said. It is about closure. If I'm going to give up my aunt's legacy, I want to do it with dignity. I want a formal signing ceremony, here, in the house. A ceremony? Derek scoffed. Just sign the papers and be done with it. No, I said firmly. I want a handover event. A celebration of the new heir. I want you to invite your partners, your friends from the club. I want everyone to witness that I am giving this gift freely to the next generation. It will make me look generous. It will stop the rumors that you forced me out. Preston stroked his chin. I could see the gears turning. He loved pageantry. He loved being the benevolent patriarch. And he especially loved the idea of publicly displaying his dominance over me and his acquisition of prime real estate. A party, Preston mused. It would be a good opportunity to announce the expansion of the Sterling Heights project, a dual celebration. Exactly, I said. And Preston, you should invite Charles Vance. The room went silent. Preston stiffened. Vance? Why the hell would I invite him? Because you won, I said, injecting a note of sycophantic admiration into my voice. He has been trying to beat you for years, but look at you. You have the land. You have the grandson. You have the legacy. Inviting him isn't about friendship. It is about rubbing his face in it. Let him see the empire you have built. Let him see the happy family he can never buy. I saw the hook sink in. Preston's ego was a massive, gaping maw, and I had just thrown a raw steak into it. He smiled, a cruel, predatory grin. "You are right," Preston chuckled. "That old buzzard would hate it. He has no sons, no grandsons, just money. I have it all." He slammed his hand on the table. "Do it. Friday night. We will cater it. Make it lavish." "I will handle the house preparation," I said softly. "It is the least I can do." For the next 2 days, I was a ghost. While the caterers bustled in and out, and the florists draped the staircase in garlands of white roses, I was working on a different kind of decoration. I told Preston I wanted to set up a slideshow of family photos for the ceremony, a tribute to the past and the future. He agreed without a second thought. Too busy micromanaging the wine list, I brought in my own equipment. I mounted a high-definition projector in the recessed lighting of the living room ceiling, camouflaged perfectly. I ran the cables behind the crown molding, tapping into the dedicated power line I used for my restoration lamps. I connected the projector not to the house Wi-Fi, but to a secure, independent hard drive hidden inside the hollow leg of the grand piano. I synced it to my phone. Then, I went to the security panel. The upgrade Preston had installed was expensive, but it was user-friendly if you had the master code. I had watched Derek punch it in 3 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. Idiots. I reprogrammed the system. I set up a lockdown protocol that could be triggered remotely once the party started. Nobody was leaving until I said so. On Friday evening, 3 hours before the guests were set to arrive, I went upstairs to Sarah's room. It was a shell. The walls were torn open, the floor covered in dust, but the window was still there. The light was still the same. I sat on the floor, in the spot where her bed used to be. I did not cry. I had no tears left. I felt a strange, cold calm, like the surface of a frozen lake. I thought about Lucas, falling through the air, betrayed by his father. I thought about Sarah, whose memory they had treated like garbage. I thought of the baby in Tiffany's womb, an innocent child being used as a pawn in a game of greed. "They think they have won, baby girl," I whispered to the empty room. "They think money protects them. They think lies are stronger than truth." I stood up and brushed the dust from my skirt. I walked to the window and looked out at the driveway, where the valets were already setting up the podium. "Tomorrow," I said, my voice steady and hard, "I am going to burn it all down, and I promise you, the fire will be beautiful." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the door wide open. The trap was set. The players were taking their places, and the executioner was ready to take the stage. By noon on Friday, my home had effectively ceased to be a residence and had transformed into a high-stakes theater set. The air conditioning was humming at maximum capacity to combat the heat generated by the dozens of bodies moving through the hallways. Preston had hired an event planning firm from the city, and they were treating the Sterling Legacy launch, as the banners proclaimed, with the gravity of a presidential inauguration. Waiters in crisp white jackets were polishing champagne flutes in my kitchen, while technicians taped down thick black cables along the baseboards of the hallway, unknowingly running their wires right past the hidden sensors I had planted the night before. I stood in the center of the living room, watching them set up rows of gold Chiavari chairs facing the fireplace. Above the mantel, where a portrait of Lucas used to hang, they had placed a massive rendering of the new Sterling Heights expansion. It was a gaudy, computer-generated image of glass towers and manicured lawns, a sanitized utopia built on corner cutting and bribery. "Move that flower arrangement to the left," Preston barked, striding through the room with a headset on. "It is blocking the line of sight for the photographers. I want the branding visible in every shot." He looked at me, or rather, he looked through me. To him, I was just another prop, a piece of furniture that had finally been rearranged to his liking. "Mary Beth," he snapped, pointing a manicured finger at the stairs. "Go get changed. The guests will start arriving in 2 hours. And for God's sake, wear something cheerful. We are celebrating the future, not mourning the past." "Of course, Preston," I said, my voice demure. "I have the perfect dress." I retreated upstairs, the noise of the preparations fading as I closed the door to the master bedroom. I walked to the closet and pulled out the garment bag I had hidden in the back. I unzipped it, and the fabric spilled out like liquid night. It was a black dress, not the dull, matte black of mourning weeds, but a sharp, architectural black silk. It had long sleeves, a high neck, and a back that plunged low. It was severe, elegant, and intimidating. It was the kind of dress a woman wears when she owns the room, not when she is serving tea in it. I slipped it on. The silk felt cool against my skin. I pulled my hair back into a tight, sleek chignon and applied a layer of crimson lipstick, a shade darker than I ever wore. I looked in the mirror. The tired, grieving widow was gone. Staring back at me was the executioner. I checked my phone. A secure message from Reynolds had just come through. My heart gave a singular, hard thump against my ribs. Subject: delivery complete. Attachment: NIPT_analysis Vance subject.pdfi. Opened the file. Reynolds had truly earned his fee. He had managed to retrieve a discarded cotton swab from a routine checkup Tiffany had attended 2 days ago, likely bribing a cleaning staff member at the clinic. The lab results were conclusive. The non-invasive prenatal testing comparison between the fetal DNA and the sample Reynolds had acquired from a coffee cup Charles Vance left at a cafe confirmed a 99.9% probability of paternity. There it was, the smoking gun. The baby wasn't a Sterling, it was a Vance. I forwarded the document to the encrypted drive connected to the projector downstairs. The chamber was loaded. Now, I just needed to lure the targets into the crosshairs. I slipped a small, high-fidelity voice recorder into the pocket of my dress and turned it on. I needed one last piece of audio to tie the noose tight around Derek's neck. I found him in the nursery, Sarah's room. The construction crew had finished the rough work, and the room was now an empty white box, smelling of fresh paint. Derek was standing by the window, staring out at the driveway, nursing a tumbler of scotch. It was 2:00 in the afternoon. "Nervous?" I asked softly. Stepping into the room, Derek jumped, splashing a little amber liquid onto his hand. He turned, his eyes glassy. "Jesus, Mary Beth, you startle easily." He looked me up and down, a sneer forming on his lips. "Black? Really? Dad is going to have a stroke." "It is slimming," I said, walking over to stand beside him. "And classy. Besides, I wanted to look my best for your big day. It is a big deal. Derek, a son, a legacy." I leaned against the windowsill, looking at him with wide, innocent eyes. "I have been thinking it must be such a relief. You know, with the pressure Preston puts on everyone, to know that you have secured the bloodline, that you have done your duty as a man." Derek puffed out his chest, the alcohol and the flattery doing exactly what I hoped they would. "Yeah, well, that is what we do. Sterlings are bred for this. We have strong genes, dominant." "So, you are excited? To be a father?" I pressed, keeping my hand near my pocket. "To see your own face in that little boy?" "Absolutely," Derek said, taking a large gulp of scotch. "It is a primal thing. Mary Beth, you wouldn't understand, but knowing that the kid is mine, that he has my DNA, my potential is the only thing that matters. That is why Dad is signing the house over. He knows I am the only one who can carry the torch." "And you have no doubts?" I asked. "No worries that maybe he won't be like you?" "None," Derek laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "He is a Sterling. He will be a shark from day one, just like his old man." "I am sure he will be," I said, smiling. "Just like his old man." I patted his arm and walked out, feeling the weight of the recorder in my pocket. He had just confessed to the lie on tape. He had claimed the child was his blood and DNA to secure the asset. That was fraud. Pure and simple. I went downstairs and slipped into the library. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was waiting for me in the shadows of the book stacks. He had arrived early through the servants' entrance, posing as a notary. He was an old man with eyes like flint. "Is it ready?" I asked. "The affidavit is prepared," Henderson said, handing me a thin folder. "It states that you are signing the transfer documents under duress and with the knowledge of fraudulent misrepresentation by the transferee. We will file this the moment the police arrive. It effectively voids whatever you sign today, provided you can prove the fraud." "I can prove it," I said, tucking the folder into a hollowed-out encyclopedia on the shelf. "Do not worry about that." "Be careful, Mary Beth," he whispered. "These men are dangerous when cornered." "I know," I said. "That is why I am not giving them a corner." A few minutes later, Preston found me. He was flanked by two of his corporate attorneys. He was holding a thick stack of legal documents bound in blue covers. "Time to sign." "Mary Beth," Preston said, checking his watch. "The first guests are pulling up to the gate. I want this done and filed before the first champagne cork pops." He slapped the papers down on the hallway console table. "Sign here, and initial here. It transfers the title to the Sterling Family Trust, effective immediately." I picked up the pen lying on the table, a heavy, gold-plated Mont Blanc that Preston had provided. "Actually, Preston," I said, reaching into my small clutch purse, "I would prefer to use my own pen. It is a superstition of mine. Lucas gave it to me." I pulled out a sleek, silver drafting pen. It looked expensive, but it was a specialized tool I used in the restoration studio. It was filled with a fugitive ink, a pigment designed for temporary sketching on sensitive canvases. It looked like permanent black ink when wet, but upon reaction with the carbon dioxide in the air, it would fade to complete invisibility within 3 hours. Preston rolled his eyes. "Fine, whatever. Just sign the damn thing." I bent over the paper. My hand was steady. I signed my name with a flourish. Mary Beth Milford. I initialed the clauses that stripped me of my home, my rights, and my history. "Done," I said, capping the pen. Preston snatched the documents away before the ink was even dry. He handed them to one of his lawyers. "File these in the safe. We will record them with the county clerk on Monday morning." By Monday morning, those signatures would be nothing but blank space. "Congratulations, Preston," I said. "You got what you wanted." "I always do," he smirked. "Now, put a smile on. The show is starting." I walked to the foyer just as the heavy oak doors swung open. The driveway was a sea of black limousines and luxury SUVs. The noise of the gathering crowd washed over me, the high-pitched, fake laughter of socialites, the deep, rumbling greetings of business tycoons, the slamming of heavy car doors. It was the sound of money. Preston stood at the entrance, shaking hands, playing the role of the benevolent king. Victoria was beside him, glittering with enough diamonds to feed a third-world country, accepting compliments on a renovation she hadn't lifted a finger to help with. Then, a hush fell over the immediate vicinity of the door. A sleek silver Bentley pulled up to the curb. The driver opened the back door, and Charles Vance stepped out. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and imposing, wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a suit of armor. He didn't look like a guest. He looked like a rival general arriving for a peace treaty he intended to break. Preston stiffened, his smile faltering for a microsecond before he plastered it back on. He stepped forward, hand extended. "Charles, I didn't think you would actually have the nerve to show up." "I wouldn't miss it, Preston," Vance said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble. He shook Preston's hand with a grip that looked painful. "I hear you are making big announcements, expanding the empire." "Something like that," Preston gloated. "And securing the line. You know how it is. Family comes first." Vance's eyes flickered past Preston. I followed his gaze. Tiffany was standing at the bottom of the stairs, one hand resting on the banister, the other cradling her bump. She looked terrified. Her skin was pale beneath her makeup. Vance looked at her, and for a second, the mask slipped. His eyes softened. He looked at her stomach with a hunger and a pride that was unmistakable. He gave her a nearly imperceptible nod. Tiffany swallowed hard and looked away. And there was Derek, standing right next to her, oblivious. He was rocking back on his heels, grinning like an idiot, seemingly thinking that Vance was admiring his wife and his child. "Glad you could make it, Mr. Vance," Derek chirped, extending his hand. "Hope you are ready to see what the next generation of Sterlings looks like." Vance looked at Derek with a mixture of pity and amusement. He shook Derek's hand briefly, dismissively. "I am very interested in the next generation. Son, very interested indeed." I stood at the top of the landing, looking down at them all. The foyer was filling up. Waiters were circulating with trays of hors d'oeuvres. The string quartet had started playing Vivaldi. It was a perfect, opulent, grotesque tableau. They were all there: the thief, the liar, the adulterer, the cuckold, and the rival. They were drinking my wine, standing on my floorboards, celebrating a theft they thought was a victory. I felt a surge of adrenaline so potent it made my fingertips tingle. I wasn't just Mary Beth the widow anymore. I was the director. I had set the lights. I had written the script. I had placed the actors exactly where I wanted them. I reached into my pocket and touched the small remote control for the projector system. "Enjoy the champagne," I whispered to the noise below. "It is the last thing that is going to taste good tonight." I took a deep breath, smoothed the black silk of my dress, and began to descend the stairs. It was time to raise the curtain. The air in the living room was so thick with the scent of expensive perfume and even more expensive hypocrisy that I could taste it on the back of my tongue. It was a metallic, floral taste, like roses dipped in gold plating solution. The string quartet had transitioned from Vivaldi to a soft, unobtrusive Mozart, providing the perfect soundtrack for the predators who were currently sipping my husband's vintage champagne and casually assessing the resale value of my furniture. I stood in the shadow of the hallway arch, watching the performance unfold. Preston had positioned himself in front of the massive fireplace, directly beneath the rendering of the new Sterling Heights towers. He held a crystal flute in one hand and a microphone in the other. His face flushed with the intoxication of his own voice. He looked like a televangelist preaching the gospel of avarice to a congregation of believers who all worshiped the same God, the dollar bill. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and valued partners," Preston boomed, his voice amplified by the surround sound system I had helped install 3 years ago. "Thank you for joining us on this momentous evening. Tonight is not just a party, it is a declaration that the Sterling name does not just endure, it evolves, it conquers." A ripple of polite applause moved through the room. I saw Charles Vance standing near the bar, swirling his whiskey, his eyes fixed on Preston with a look of amused, predatory patience. He was waiting for the slip-up. He didn't know I was about to hand him the entire building. "But a legacy is nothing without land to anchor it," Preston continued, his voice dropping to a somber, theatrically pious register. He turned his gaze toward me, spotting me in the shadows. He gestured with his glass, inviting me, or rather, commanding me, to step forward into the light. "And tonight, we must acknowledge a supreme act of generosity. My daughter-in-law, Mary Beth." The crowd turned. Hundreds of eyes landed on me. I stepped into the room, the black silk of my dress rustling softly like dry leaves. I kept my face impassive, a porcelain mask that gave away nothing of the fire burning beneath my ribs. "Mary Beth has had a difficult few years," Preston sighed, shaking his head with performative sadness. "She has known loss. She has known the pain of emptiness, the tragedy of a nursery that remained silent, the heartbreak of a lineage that hit a dead end." I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. He was doing it. He was publicly weaponizing my infertility and the death of my child to justify his theft. "But," Preston brightened, a shark-like grin spreading across his face, "Mary Beth has realized that while she cannot provide the Sterling family with a future, she can provide the foundation for one. She has voluntarily, and with a full heart, Signed over the deed to this magnificent estate to the Sterling Family Trust. He paused for effect, letting the gasp of admiration sweep through the room. She does this as a gift, he lied, his voice trembling with fake emotion. A gift of atonement. Perhaps a way to apologize to the family for the disappointment of the past, and to welcome the glorious future. She gives this house to my grandson, the future king of Sterling construction. He swept his arm toward Tiffany and Derek. Tiffany was seated on a velvet chaise lounge that had been dragged to the center of the room, looking for all the world like a fertility goddess in a designer gown. She placed both hands on her stomach, looked up at Preston with tear-filled eyes, and mouthed, "Thank you." The room erupted in applause. It was sickening. They were clapping for my erasure. They were cheering for the woman who was willing to be homeless so the rich man could have another garage. Derek stood behind Tiffany, beaming, puffing out his chest, soaking up the applause for a virility he did not possess. "Mary Beth," Preston called out over the clapping, "come up here. Come say a few words about your donation." He held out a piece of paper. I knew what it was. It was the speech he had written for me, a speech where I would likely thank them for their mercy and fade gracefully into the background. I walked through the crowd. The sea of tuxedos and gowns parted for me, but the looks I received were not kind. They were pitying. They were the looks one gives to a horse that is being led away to the glue factory. Poor thing. Their eyes said, "At least she is being useful one last time." I reached the front of the room. Preston handed me the microphone and the folded piece of paper. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of scotch and mints. "Read it exactly as written," he hissed in my ear. "Do not embarrass me, or you will be sleeping in your car tonight." I took the microphone. I took the paper. I looked at the crowd. I looked at Charles Vance, who had moved closer, his interest piqued by the tension radiating off me. I looked at Tiffany, who was smirking behind her hand. I looked at Derek, the man who had let his father bully his brother to death. I slowly unfolded the paper Preston had given me. I looked at it for a long moment. Then, with a deliberate, casual motion, I crumpled it into a tight ball and let it drop to the floor. The silence that followed was instant and absolute. The sound of the paper hitting the hardwood floor seemed to echo like a gunshot. Preston's smile froze. His eyes bulged slightly. I reached into my black clutch purse, but instead of a tissue to wipe away tears, I pulled out the slim black remote control for the projector. "I do not think I need a script for the truth." "Preston," I said. My voice was not the soft, trembling whisper they were used to. It was low, resonant, and steady. It was the voice of a woman who had nothing left to lose. "I want to share a bit about the history of this house," I said, addressing the crowd, ignoring Preston who was starting to step toward me. "And more importantly, I want to talk about the people who think they own it." "Mary Beth, that is enough," Preston warned, his voice tight. "You are emotional. Step down." "I am not emotional, Preston," I said, turning to face him. "I am accurate. You like accuracy, don't you? You like numbers. You like data." I pointed the remote at the ceiling. "Let us look at some data." I pressed the button. The giant rendering of the Sterling Heights Tower above the fireplace vanished. In its place, projected in high-definition clarity, was not a photo of the baby, nor a picture of the house. It was a spreadsheet. Specifically, it was the zoning reclassification expense log from the USB drive I had found in the wall. The font was large enough for everyone in the room to read. Payee: Councilman Miller. Date: August 12th. Amount: $50,000. Purpose: wetland deregulation approval. Payee: City Inspector Davis. Date: September 1st. Amount: $25,000. Purpose: ignore soil instability report. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Confused whispers broke out. "What is this? Is this a joke? What is that?" Preston stammered, turning to look at the screen. His face drained of color so fast it looked like the blood had been sucked out of him. "Turn that off! What are you doing?" "This," I said, my voice cutting through the rising noise, "is the foundation of your legacy. Preston, you said land is the only thing that matters, but you didn't buy the land for Sterling Heights, did you? You stole it. You bribed elected officials to reclassify a protected wetland so you could build condos on sinking mud." I clicked the remote again. The screen changed. Now it was a scanned copy of a safety report. The header read, "Site Incident Report. Fatality. Lucas Sterling." The room went deadly quiet. Even the waiters stopped moving. "And this," I said, my voice trembling slightly with rage before I clamped it down, "is the cost of your greed. This is the report you buried." The one where the site foreman explicitly stated that the scaffolding clamps failed because they were substandard. The clamps you ordered to save $2 million. "She is lying," Preston screamed, lunging for the remote. "She is insane. She is hysterical with grief. Someone cut the feed." He waved frantically at the back of the room where the AV technicians were standing. "Cut the power. Turn it off now." The lead technician, a man Preston had hired, looked confused and scrambled for the power strip. He flipped the switch. The lights in the room flickered and died. The chandeliers went dark. A gasp went up from the crowd. But the projector did not turn off. It hummed on, brighter than ever in the darkened room, powered by the independent battery backup I had installed inside the ceiling cavity. The image on the screen shifted again. It was now a photo of Preston's signature on the order to cut safety protocols, side by side with Lucas's refusal letter. "You cannot turn off the truth. Preston," I said, my voice amplified by the battery-powered speaker I had placed on the mantel. "I am not plugged into your grid anymore." Preston was panting, looking around wildly in the semi-darkness, illuminated only by the ghostly blue light of the incriminating documents. "Security! Get her out of here! Remove this woman from my house!" Two burly security guards in dark suits started pushing through the crowd toward me. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened the smart home app. "This is not your house yet. Preston," I said, "the deed hasn't been recorded. Legally, I am still the owner, and as the owner, I have the right to secure the premises." I pressed the lockdown button on my screen. Clack-thud. The heavy deadbolts on the front double doors slammed home. The sound was loud, mechanical, and final. The side doors followed suit. The motorized security shutters I had installed over the bay windows, ostensibly for hurricane protection, began to descend with a low, grinding whir. "What is going on?" someone shouted. "The doors are locked." Panic began to edge into the voices of the guests. These were people who were used to controlling every aspect of their lives. Being locked in a room with a vengeful widow and a list of felonies was not on their itinerary. "Nobody leaves," I declared, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Not until we finish the presentation. We are here to celebrate a new arrival, aren't we? A new member of the family?" I looked at Tiffany. She was shrinking back into the cushions of the chaise lounge, her face a mask of pure terror. She knew. She realized that if I knew about the bribes, and I knew about the safety clamps, I probably knew everything. Derek was standing up, looking confused and angry. "Mary Beth, open the damn doors. You are scaring Tiffany. You are going to hurt the baby." "Ah, the baby," I said, stepping closer to the edge of the stage. The security guards had stopped, unsure of what to do in the chaos, especially since their boss was currently being exposed as a felon on a 20-foot screen. "The miracle child," I continued. "The one who is going to inherit everything. The one Preston is so proud of because he carries the dominant Sterling genes." I clicked the remote one more time. The screen went black for a second. "Before we toast to this child," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow louder than a scream, "I think it is vital that we clarify exactly which family he belongs to, because, Preston, you are right about one thing. Blood does not lie." Preston was frozen. He looked from me to the blank screen, dread pooling in his eyes. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew it was the end. "Let us introduce the real father," I said, and I pressed the button. The screen flickered, casting a ghostly blue pallor over the terrified faces of the guests, and then the image stabilized. It was not a photograph of a smiling baby or a sonogram strip. It was a document, stark and clinical, blown up to the size of a billboard. The header was unmistakable. Zurich Institute of Reproductive Health. The date was from 10 years ago, and the patient's name, highlighted in a damning yellow box I had added myself, was Derek Sterling. The text was dense with medical jargon, but I had magnified the conclusion section at the bottom so that even the most nearsighted dowager in the back row could read it. Diagnosis: post-viral bilateral orchitis, azospermia. Conclusion: irreversible sterility. The silence that had gripped the room shattered. It started as a low murmur, like the sound of insects buzzing in tall grass, and then it exploded into a cacophony of gasps, whispers, and shocked laughter. "Sterile?" someone whispered loudly near the front. "But she is 6 months pregnant." "I thought he said he had dominant genes," another voice sneered. I looked down at Derek. The glass of scotch he had been holding slipped from his fingers. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered, the amber liquid splashing onto his polished dress shoes. But he did not move. He did not blink. His face had gone from a flush of arrogant pride to a sickly waxen gray. He looked like a man who had just been gutted and was staring down at his own entrails. He turned his head slowly, mechanically, toward Tiffany. "You knew," Derek croaked, his voice barely audible over the rising din of the crowd. "You said it was a miracle." Tiffany was shaking so hard the chaise lounge vibrated beneath her. She pressed her hands over her mouth, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. The motorized shutters were down. The doors were bolted. There was nowhere to run. "I can explain," Tiffany stammered, her voice shrill with panic. "Derek, listen to me. It was for us. It was for the money." "But who?" Derek screamed, the sound tearing out of his throat. "If it is not mine, then whose bastard is inside you?" "That is an excellent question," I said into the microphone, my voice cutting through their domestic dispute like a scalpel. "And since we are all about transparency tonight, let us answer it." I clicked the remote. The medical report vanished. In its place, a series of photographs appeared in rapid succession, tiling across the screen. Click, Tiffany entering the Diamondback Casino in a trench coat. Click, Tiffany sitting at a private blackjack table. Click, a hand reaching out to touch hers, a man's hand, wearing a distinctive onyx ring. Click, the man leaning in to kiss her cheek, the man's face, captured in high definition by Reynolds's telephoto lens. It was Charles Vance, and right next to the photos, the final nail in the coffin appeared, the NIPT-DNA comparison chart. Paternity probability, 99.9%. Biological father, Charles Vance. The reaction was instantaneous. It was not just shock. It was scandal of biblical proportions. The room turned as one organism, hundreds of heads swiveling to look at the front row where Charles Vance was standing, the king of aggregates. The man who had walked in looking like a conqueror was now frozen. His face was a mask of sheer horror. He wasn't ashamed of the affair. Men like him didn't feel shame for their conquests, but he was terrified of the exposure. He had been caught infiltrating his rival's bloodline in a room full of their mutual business associates. "Vance?" Preston whispered. The word left his lips like a curse. Preston Sterling looked at the screen, then at his daughter-in-law, then at his arch-rival. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back, clutching the edge of the fireplace for support. His grandson, the future of his company, the heir to the Sterling throne, was a Vance. He had been about to sign over his entire estate to the seed of his greatest enemy. "You!" Preston roared, pointing a trembling finger at Vance. "You snake! You slept with my son's wife? You tried to plant your cuckoo in my nest?" Vance held up his hands, backing away as the crowd parted around him like the Red Sea. "Now, Preston, calm down. It was a business merger, an unofficial merger. I will kill you, Preston screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He lunged toward Vance, but his own security guards, confused and overwhelmed, blocked his path. "Turn it off!" Preston shrieked, spinning around to face me, his eyes bulging. "Mary Beth, turn that damn machine off. You have ruined everything. You have humiliated this family." "I am not done, Preston," I said, my voice cold and hard as iron. "We have established that there is no heir. Now, let us establish why there is no Lucas." "No!" Preston bellowed. "Do not!" I pressed the button. The screen went black, but the audio feed kicked in. It was the recording I had found in the wall. The sound of static filled the room, followed by the unmistakable voice of my dead husband. "You cannot cut the budget on the scaffolding clamps. Dad, they are not rated for that wind load. If a storm hits, the whole platform comes down." The room fell into a deathly silence. The socialites, the bankers, the lawyers, they all stopped whispering. They were listening to a ghost. Then came Preston's voice, booming through the speakers, louder and clearer than life. "I am not paying premium prices for safety gear that we will use once. Use the standard clamps. Sign off on it. Lucas, if you do not, you are out. No trust fund, no job." On the screen, a new document appeared. The coroner's report for Lucas Sterling, listing blunt force trauma due to fall as the cause of death. Next to it, I projected the invoice Preston had signed for the cheap, substandard clamps, dated 3 days before the accident. "He knew," I said, my voice trembling with the force of my own grief. "He knew the risk, and when Lucas refused to sign off on a death trap, Preston forged his signature and sent him up onto that platform anyway. It wasn't an accident. It was manslaughter for profit." A strangled cry echoed from the side of the room. Victoria Sterling was standing there, her hands clutching her diamond necklace. She was staring at her husband with wide, uncomprehending eyes. She had spent her life ignoring his sins, burying her head in the sand of luxury, but she could not ignore the voice of her dead son. "Preston?" she whispered, her voice breaking. You said it was the wind. You said it was an act of God." "Victoria, listen to me," Preston pleaded, reaching out to her. "The girl is manipulating the audio. It is a deep fake." "It is his voice," Victoria sobbed. "It is my boy's voice." She took one step toward him, then her eyes rolled back in her head. She collapsed in a heap of chiffon and diamonds, hitting the floor with a dull thud. "Mom!" Derek shouted. But he didn't run to her. He was vibrating with a different kind of madness. Derek looked at his father, the man who had killed his brother. He looked at Vance, the man who had slept with his wife. He looked at Tiffany, the woman who had made him a laughingstock. Something inside Derek broke. The thin veneer of civilization that held his weak, pathetic soul together snapped. "You whore!" Derek screamed. His face twisted into a rictus of pure hate. He didn't go for his father. He didn't go for Vance. He went for the easiest target. He launched himself at Tiffany. Tiffany screamed as Derek leaped onto the chaise lounge, his hands reaching for her throat. "Get off her!" Charles Vance roared. Vance, reacting with the instinct of a man protecting his property, charged into the fray. He tackled Derek, slamming him sideways into a table full of crystal glasses. The table shattered, sending shards of glass flying into the crowd. Guests screamed and scrambled back, tripping over their long gowns and expensive shoes. It was chaos, absolute, unadulterated chaos. Derek and Vance were rolling on the floor, trading punches. Vance was older, but he was bigger and fueled by adrenaline. Derek was younger, but he was fighting with the hysterical strength of a man who had lost his masculinity. Preston was on his knees beside his unconscious wife, trying to slap her awake while screaming at his lawyers to fix this. And I stood above it all. I stood on the landing of the staircase, looking down at the pit of vipers I had unleashed. They were tearing each other apart. The family that had prided itself on dignity, on legacy, on being better than the common rabble, was now brawling on the floor like drunkards in a saloon. I raised the microphone to my lips one last time. "Look at you," I said. My voice was calm, detached, almost bored. The fighting didn't stop, but the guests who were pressed against the locked doors turned to look at me with fearful awe. "You wanted this house so badly," I continued. "You wanted the land. You wanted the legacy. Well, here it is. This is your legacy. Preston, violence, lies, betrayal. This is what you built." I looked at the screen, where the image of Lucas's autopsy report still glowed. "This house never belonged to you," I said. "And that child? That heir you were so desperate for? He doesn't belong to you either. It is all just an illusion of your own greed, and now, the illusion is over." Preston looked up at me, his face streaked with sweat and tears. "You bitch," he hissed. "I will ruin you. I will kill you." "You cannot kill someone who is already dead inside, Preston," I replied. "And as for ruining me, I think you are a little too late." I reached into my pocket and pressed a different button on my phone. The security shutters on the front windows began to rise with a mechanical hum. Through the glass, flashing blue and red lights washed over the room, painting the chaotic scene in the colors of the law. The sound of sirens, which had been a distant wail, now rose to a deafening crescendo right outside the driveway. I had timed it perfectly. The email to Mr. Henderson had been released. The police had been called not for a noise complaint, but for a homicide investigation and a massive corporate fraud bust. "I believe your ride is here," I said. The heavy front doors shook as a battering ram hit them from the outside. Boom! "Police! Open up!" The guests screamed again. Derek and Vance stopped fighting, freezing in a tangle of limbs and blood. Preston tried to scramble to his feet, looking for a back exit that he knew was locked. I dropped the microphone. It hit the stairs with a loud thud that echoed through the room. I turned my back on the carnage, on the screaming, on the flashing lights. I walked slowly back up the stairs toward Sarah's room. I didn't need to see the rest. I knew how this story ended. I had written it. After all, the wooden doors of my foyer did not just open. They disintegrated under the force of the tactical battering ram. The sound was a thunderclap that severed the last thread of the party's composure. Splinters of expensive oak flew through the air, landing on the marble floor like shrapnel. Before the guests could even scream, the room was flooded with uniforms. It was not just the local patrol. It was a coordinated strike force. Men in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI, state police, and Department of Buildings poured into the hallway, their boots stamping out the rhythm of the Sterling Empire's demise. "Nobody move!" a voice bellowed. It was Detective Miller, a man whose face I recognized from the countless times he had tried to investigate the accidents at Sterling sites. Only to be stonewalled by Preston's lawyers, tonight, he was not hitting a wall. He was the sledgehammer. Preston scrambled backward, knocking over a tray of champagne flutes. The crystal shattered, mixing with the spilled alcohol to create a treacherous, glittering slush. "What is the meaning of this?" Preston shouted, trying to summon his usual bluster, though his voice cracked. "I am Preston Sterling. You cannot barge into a private residence without—" "Preston Sterling, you are under arrest," Detective Miller cut him off. Stepping over the debris, he held up a piece of paper that looked far more damaging than the one I had crumpled earlier. "We have a warrant for your arrest on 12 counts of wire fraud, 4 counts of bribery of a public official, and 1 count of involuntary manslaughter in the 2nd degree regarding the death of Lucas Sterling." The room gasped. The word manslaughter hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "That is absurd," Preston spat, though he was backing away until his spine hit the wall. "My lawyers will have your badge for this. It was an accident. The wind—" "We have the audio, Preston," Miller said, his voice flat and unimpressed. "We have the invoices for the clamps. We have the sworn affidavit from the site foreman you paid off, who decided to flip 20 minutes ago when we picked him up at his house. You are done." Two officers grabbed Preston's arms. He struggled, a pathetic, flailing motion, but they spun him around and slammed him against the silk wallpaper. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Click, 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 the sound of absolute finality. "Do not say a word. Preston!" one of the corporate lawyers shouted from the crowd, already backing toward the door. "Do not say anything until we get to the station." But the police were not done. Miller turned his gaze to the front row, where Charles Vance was trying to inch his way toward the side exit, smoothing his tuxedo jacket as if he could simply blend into the curtains. "Mr. Vance," Miller called out. "I wouldn't leave just yet." Vance froze. He turned slowly, putting on a mask of confused innocence. "Officer, this is a family dispute. I am just a guest. I have businesses to run." "We know," Miller said, signaling to two agents in suits. "We are very interested in your businesses, specifically the transfer of funds between Vance Aggregates and the Diamondback Casino. We have a warrant to seize your electronic devices and financial records regarding an ongoing money laundering investigation involving illicit payments to let me check my notes. A Ms. Tiffany Sterling." Vance's face went white. The connection I had exposed, the affair, was not just a moral failing. It was the financial conduit. The payments he had made to Tiffany disguised as casino winnings were traceable, and now they were evidence. "This is a mistake," Vance muttered. But he let the agents take his arms. He knew the game was up. He looked at Tiffany, who was standing frozen near the shattered chaise lounge. His eyes were cold, dead sharks. "I do not know that woman," he said loudly, for the benefit of the room. "She is nothing to me." Tiffany let out a sob that sounded like a wounded animal. "Charles? But the baby?" "I have no children," Vance hissed as he was led away. Tiffany stood there, trembling, clutching her stomach. She looked around the room, her eyes landing on the Sterlings. Preston was being marched out. Victoria was still unconscious on the floor, being tended to by a paramedic who had entered with the police. That left Derek. Derek was sitting on the floor amidst the broken glass. His tuxedo shirt was torn, his lip was bleeding, and his eyes were staring at nothing. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Tiffany took a step toward him. "Derek, baby, please. We can fix this. I did it for us. I did it so we could have the money." Derek looked up. For the first time in his life, there was no arrogance in his face. There was only a hollow, terrifying emptiness. He looked at his wife, the woman carrying another man's child, the woman who had played him for a fool in front of the entire elite of the state. "Get away from me," Derek whispered. "Derek, please, I have nowhere to go," Tiffany cried, reaching for his hand. "I said get out." Derek screamed, scrambling backward on the floor like a crab, terrified to even let her shadow touch him. "You are not my wife. That is not my kid. Get out." "You heard him," I said. I had descended the stairs and was standing near the police chief. I looked at Tiffany. "This is a private residence, and you are trespassing. The Sterling family, what is left of it, has revoked your invitation." Tiffany looked at the police officers. They stood impassive. She looked at the guests. They averted their eyes, clutching their pearls in their clutches, desperate to distance themselves from the contagion of her shame. "But I have no money," Tiffany wailed, the mascara running down her face in black streaks. "My cards are linked to Derek's account." "Then I suggest you start walking," I said calmly. "I hear the bus station is only 5 miles away." Tiffany let out a shriek of frustration and ran out the broken front door, disappearing into the night, chasing after the police cruiser that held her lover, a man who would never acknowledge her again. The room began to clear out with the speed of a sinking ship. The guests, the partners, the bankers, the social climbers, were scrambling for the exits. I heard snippets of their frantic conversations as they pushed past the police. "Cancel the contract with Sterling first thing in the morning," a man in a velvet blazer shouted into his phone. "I don't care about the penalty clause. The brand is toxic. If we are linked to a manslaughter charge, our stock will tank. Pull the financing on the Heights project, another banker ordered his assistant. Recall the loans, all of them. The collateral is seized. Did you know? A woman whispered to her husband. Did you know about the bribes? Of course not, he lied. I am deleting his number right now. We were never here. In less than 10 minutes, the cream of society had curdled and drained away, leaving only the wreckage behind. I walked over to Detective Miller. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the original rusted tin box containing the USB drive and the physical documents. I also produced a small, silver key. This is the master copy, I told him. And this key opens the hidden wall safe behind the portrait of the founder in Preston's executive office at the headquarters. You will find the original ledgers there, the ones he keeps off the books. Miller took the items, nodding with a grim respect. You did good work. Mrs. Milford, dangerous work. It was necessary work, I replied. Make sure it sticks. With what you gave us? He is going away for 20 years, minimum. The federal guys are already fighting over who gets to prosecute the fraud charges. He is finished. They hauled Preston out. As he passed me, handcuffed and disheveled. He didn't scream. He didn't curse. He just looked at me with a look of utter bewilderment, as if he still couldn't understand how a piece of furniture had come to life and burned down his house. Why? He rasped. We offered you a place. You offered me a cage. Preston, I said softly. I preferred the truth. He was shoved into the back of a squad car, the lights painting his face in alternating stripes of red and blue shame. Inside the house, the paramedics were lifting Victoria onto a stretcher. She was awake now, weeping softly, calling out for Lucas. Derek was still sitting on the floor, hugging his knees, rocking back and forth. I walked over to him. Derek, I said. He didn't look up. It is all gone, he mumbled. The trust, the company, the baby. It is all gone. You need to leave, I said. He looked up then, blinking through his tears. What? But where do I go? This is my house. Dad said. Dad is in handcuffs, I reminded him. And this house belongs to me. The papers I signed were done with fugitive ink. They are blank by now. Look at them. I pointed to the console table where the legal documents still lay. Derek stumbled over and opened the blue folder. The signature line was pristine white. The ink had vanished. You have no claim here, I said. And frankly, I do not want the stench of your failure in my living room. Get your mother, and get out. But Mom is sick, Derek stammered. The ambulance is taking her to the hospital, I said. You can ride with her. After that, I suggest you find a very cheap apartment. You're going to need to save your pennies. I doubt the Sterling Trust Fund pays out to the sons of felons. 2 officers helped Derek to his feet and escorted him out. He looked small. He looked like a child wearing his father's clothes. He walked out into the night, leaving behind the only life he had ever known, stripping him down to exactly what he was. Nothing. The house was finally quiet, save for the heavy breathing of the workers, Preston's construction crew, the men who had torn down Sarah's wall, the men who had thrown her dolls on the lawn, were huddled in the corner, looking terrified. They had been detained by the police for questioning, but released pending further investigation. They were packing up their tools, trying to sneak out. Stop, I commanded. The foreman, the one who had held the sledgehammer, froze. You are not leaving, I said. Lady, we just work here, he stammered. We didn't know about the bribes. I don't care about the bribes, I said, pointing to the debris scattered across the floor, the broken drywall, the shattered glass, the crumpled paper, the hors d'oeuvres trampled into the rug. I care about my house. I walked over to the corner and picked up a broom. I tossed it to him. He caught it by reflex. You made this mess, I said, my voice brooking no argument. You tore down my walls. You disrespected my daughter's memory. You do not get to walk away. But the police are gone, I said. And until this floor is clean, until every piece of drywall is swept up, and until Sarah's furniture is brought back inside from the lawn and placed exactly where you found it, nobody unlocks that gate. Do you understand? The foreman looked at me. He saw the look in my eyes, the look of a woman who had just toppled a dynasty. He swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, ma'am. Start sweeping, I said. I watched them for an hour. I watched them sweat. I watched them carry the lavender wardrobe back up the stairs with a reverence they should have shown the first time. I watched them pick up the porcelain dolls from the grass, dusting them off with trembling hands. When they were done, when the floor was swept and the furniture was returned, I unlocked the gate and watched their truck speed away as if the devil himself were chasing them. I stood alone in the foyer. The front doors were broken, hanging off their hinges, but the house felt more secure than it ever had with the locks. I walked to the main entrance. I grabbed the heavy brass handles of the inner vestibule doors, the ones that hadn't been smashed, and pulled them shut. Thud. The sound echoed through the empty house. It was a heavy, solid sound. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood. I took a deep breath. For 3 years, the air in this house had been stale, recycled, heavy with grief and the suffocating presence of the Sterlings. But now? I inhaled. It smelled of sawdust and night air. It smelled of silence. It smelled of victory. I turned around and looked at the empty staircase. The ghosts were still there. Lucas, Sarah. But the monsters were gone. We are okay, I whispered to the empty room. We are finally okay. It has been 6 months since the sirens faded from my driveway, and for the first time in years, the silence in my house is not heavy. It does not press down on my chest like a physical weight. Instead, it feels light, airy, and full of possibility, like a blank canvas waiting for the first stroke of a brush. I stood in the center of the nursery this morning, the hole in the wall, the violent scar left by Preston's greed and the sledgehammers of his workmen, is gone. I hired a local carpenter, a man who works with his hands and his heart, to repair the damage. He did not just patch the drywall, he reinforced the bones of the room. We painted the walls a soft, soothing shade of lavender, matching the color chip I found in an old drawer, the exact shade Sarah had picked out when she was 4 years old. The bed is back in its rightful place, tucked into the corner where the morning sun hits the pillow. I spent a week washing the stuffed animals, hand-scrubbing the soot of neglect from their synthetic fur until they smelled of chamomile and fresh linen. The porcelain doll with the broken arm sits on the shelf. I did not replace the arm. I glued it back together, leaving the crack visible. In my line of work, we call it kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. Treating the breakage and repair as part of the history of an object, rather than something to disguise. That doll is stronger at the break than it ever was before. Just like me, the world outside this sanctuary has moved on, but not without delivering the final, crushing blows of justice that I had set in motion. I read the newspaper this morning with my coffee. The headline was small, buried on page 4, which felt appropriate. Preston Sterling does not deserve the front page anymore. The article detailed his sentencing hearing. The judge, a woman with a reputation for zero tolerance regarding white-collar crime, was not swayed by his lawyer's pleas for leniency based on his age or his standing in the community. She sentenced Preston Sterling to 20 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole for 15 years. 20 years. He will be an old, forgotten man when, or if, he ever walks free. The article also mentioned the assets. The Sterling Empire has been dismantled brick by brick. The government seized everything to pay restitution to the families of the workers injured or killed at his negligent construction sites, and to refund the investors he had defrauded. The mansion on the hill, the yacht, the fleet of cars, all gone. His legacy is not a skyscraper. It is a cautionary tale told in law schools. And then there is Derek. I saw him a week ago. Though he did not see me, I was in the city meeting with a gallery owner, and I stopped at a small, greasy diner for lunch. The kitchen door swung open, and I saw a man in a stained apron hunched over a sink full of dirty dishes. His shoulders were slumped, his hair thinning and unkempt. It was Derek. I learned later from a mutual acquaintance that he is living in a studio apartment above a laundromat in a rough part of town. He had to sell his watches, his designer suits, and his sports car just to pay his legal fees, which ultimately did him no good. No respectable firm would hire a sterling now. The name that he thought was his golden ticket has become a curse branded on his forehead. He spends his days scrubbing the grease off other people's plates, earning minimum wage, finally learning the meaning of the hard labor he used to mock. Tiffany fared no better. The baby was born last month, a boy. But Charles Vance is a man who protects his own empire with the same ruthlessness Preston had. Vance's lawyers tied Tiffany up in so much litigation that she hasn't seen a dime of child support. He demanded paternity tests from 3 different labs, dragging out the process, bleeding her dry. She was evicted from the condo Derek had been renting for her. Last I heard, she is living with her mother in a trailer park 2 counties over, drowning in credit card debt and facing lawsuits from the boutiques she used to frequent. She wanted to marry into money. Instead, she married into ruin. But I do not dwell on their misery. Their punishment is their own doing. I just turned on the light so the world could see it. My focus has been on the future. When the forensic accountants finished tearing through Preston's hidden ledgers, they found the insurance payout from Lucas's accident. Preston had intercepted it, forging my signature to deposit it into an offshore account. It was a substantial sum, $2 million. The court returned it to me in full, with interest. I did not buy a new car. I did not take a vacation. I took that money, every single cent of it, and I walked into the local Arts Council office. I established the Sarah and Lucas Milford Scholarship Fund. It is a permanent endowment designed to provide full college tuition for underprivileged children who show promise in the visual arts, but lack the financial means to pursue their dreams. Every year, 4 students will go to art school because of my husband and my daughter. Their names will be spoken at graduations, at gallery openings, and in gratitude by families who never thought they could afford a future. That is a legacy. That is immortality. Preston wanted his name on a building. I put my family's name on the future. I walked over to the window of the nursery and pushed it open. The air outside was crisp, smelling of fallen leaves and damp earth. The sun poured into the room, a warm golden cascade that illuminated the easel I had set up in the corner. On the easel was a painting. It was not a restoration of an old master. It was something new. I had started painting again. It was a watercolor of 2 figures sitting on a grassy hill, flying a kite. A father and a daughter, their backs to the viewer, looking out at a horizon that stretched on forever. I stood there, bathing in the sunlight, and I closed my eyes. For the first time, I did not feel the sharp, stabbing pain of loss. I felt a warmth wrap around my shoulders. Like a familiar arm, I felt a small hand slip into mine. They are not gone, not really. They are here, in the dust motes dancing in the light, in the brushstrokes on the canvas, in the quiet peace of a house that is finally, truly mine. I am not a widow guarding a tomb anymore. I am a woman living in a home filled with love. A sudden sound from downstairs broke my reverie, the mail slot clacking shut. I walked downstairs, the wooden steps cool beneath my bare feet. Lying on the doormat, amidst the utility bills and flyers, was a single white envelope. It stood out because of the return address stamped in red ink. Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury. My heart gave a single, hard thump, but it did not race. I picked it up. The handwriting was shaky, desperate, but unmistakable. It was Preston's. I took the envelope into the kitchen. I did not sit down. I grabbed a box of matches from the drawer and walked out the back door, past the garden, and into my car. I drove to the cemetery. It is a beautiful place, quiet and green. I walked to the plot where Lucas and Sarah rest side by side. The headstones were clean, the grass trimmed. I placed a fresh bouquet of lavender on Sarah's grave and a single white rose on Lucas's. Then, I looked at the letter in my hand. I could guess what was inside. A plea for forgiveness? A request for a visit? A final attempt to manipulate me into helping him get a reduced sentence? It didn't matter. The words of a narcissist are just wind. They have no weight unless you give them a sail. I did not open the envelope. I struck a match. The flame flared to life, orange and hungry against the gray sky. I held the flame to the corner of the envelope. The paper caught instantly. I watched the fire curl the edges, turning the white paper into black, brittle ash. I watched the red stamp of the prison disappear. I watched Preston's handwriting curl and vanish into smoke. I held it until the heat kissed my fingertips. Then I dropped the burning remnant onto the stone path. I watched it burn until there was nothing left but a small pile of gray dust. A sudden breeze swept through the cemetery, swirling the ash up into the air. It danced for a moment, suspended, and then it scattered, blown away into nothingness, leaving no mark, no stain, no trace. "Goodbye, Preston," I whispered. I looked at the graves of my family one last time. "I love you," I said to the stone and the sky. "I will live for all of us." I turned my back on the ashes. I walked back to my car. My step light, my head high. I did not look in the rearview mirror as I drove away. There was nothing behind me that I needed. The road ahead was open, and for the first time in a long time, I was driving toward the sun. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Mary Beth's journey. If you enjoyed seeing justice served and finding hope in the aftermath, please subscribe to the channel Sweet Rose Drama, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people who need to believe that the light always returns.